much as Matthew and we all were inspired by the superhero films, we were more interested in looking actually at the early Bond movies, the Sean Connery Bonds, partly because they did such a cool job of representing this period in a way that still felt muscular and action-oriented.
I came very close to doing a Bond movie. I love the character of Bond, and for me, I really loved the idea that Magneto was the young Connery, badass, charming, ruthless, sweet, everything that Connery gave to Bond, I knew Fassbender could do to Eric, and that's what drew me in.
Matthew was very, very keen to get sort of that sort of very Bond-esque style and that sort of genre into this. And in the very early days, we used a lot of that sort of Ken Adam visual reference, the big sweeping ceilings and space, just using space.
And in the early 60s, there are those houses with the sunken living rooms and that very modern architecture. There were few places in London that had that, so we couldn't shoot practical, and we built everything.
Every time I come into a scene, from a production design standpoint, I'm constantly amazed. We went from the Hellfire Club lair. There's a very specific 60s modern style, but not right down the line of 60s modern. And then it was translated so well into my submarine, which has some of the same kind of fabrics and the same sort of look tonally. So you get this idea that as a character, I've got my own kind of sense of style, which was really amazing.
There's nothing on radar.
Yet. Originally in the script there were these three parts: the control room, the living quarters, and then the engine room, which is called the mirror room. And originally in the script there were corridors connecting them all. And then we discussed that we maybe should put them as a composite, which I think was a smart move, and that was Matthew. Visually, I think it works. It's great. I think it's better than having all these corridors connecting. You just literally go from one to the other to the other.
It's crazy because you don't have the feeling that you are in a decorated. It's like a submarine. For example, I said, why the submarine is higher? It's not necessary, because it would be easier to put it in the floor. Is because the submarine it has to move. In other movie, the director maybe could move the camera, but here they prefer move the whole submarine. So it's crazy.
When you come onto a set and you've got like a submarine that's on a jib, that can break off into 3 different sections, and then, we're inside in the X-Jet, and that's also on this gimbal. It's a real privilege to sort of see how that works and see how, an art department gets something like that together. And, how a sort of idea starts with a pencil and a piece of paper, and then sort of there it is in physical form, and you're walking around inside it. That's pretty impressive.
For Matthew, one of the sort of exciting prospects with the movie was to kind of reverse engineer some of the things that the fans already knew and loved. So it's kind of like, did you ever wonder when you were watching X1, 2 or 3 what the X-Jet looked like? Well, this is the first version of it.
The money's all going in the hair. Everybody's got exceptional 60s hair, as done by Francis Josephine and Veronica Hannon. First of all, that's important to say. But after that, the rest of the money, I think, went on the X-Jet. The X-Jet's quite incredible. And funnily enough, the X-Jet messes up everybody's hair because we all get spun around quite a lot in it.
We've built this set to revolve 360 degrees, however many times we like, at a speed of 12 revs per minute, which is a revolution every 6 seconds, which is pretty fast. And we're doing that with the actors in, so they're all having quite a little fairground ride at the same time.
The X-Jet's awesome. It really looks fantastic. It's very, very practical. There's lots of switches and buttons, and it's a bit more like a World War II submarine inside than it is the X-Jet that we're used to seeing.
It's loosely based on the American fighter plane, but obviously there's a lot of artistic license there. We had to make it a little bigger because we had to fit a lot more people in it, because the original plane was much, much smaller, and we had to increase the fuselage in order to create the seating down the sides, and also because of the action we wanted to get the guys falling through the floor, the Bombay doors.
The tricky thing was trying to time the controls with the gimbal's movements to make it look like I was actually flying. But it was just a lot of fun. It was like being at a theme park.
And it was weird for them. I mean, first of all, you know, they're sitting for hours strapped into this thing, being thrown around. So some of their panic when the X-Jet tilts and rolls over was real, because we were really doing it to them. But they also had incredible patience, because there was problems with it. We had problems with the windows. Windows were supposed to be out, but the windows were in. We had reflection. We didn't have time to get rid of the windows. And so, I mean, they were literally strapped in there for days upon days, and they were good sports about it.
There's not a frame of this film that isn't really interestingly production designed and shot. It just has so much detail and texture to it that Matthew is a freak for. And a lot of that comes from having watched these movies from the 60s, where you get, if the wallpaper is on the wall, it is cool wallpaper.
And it's tricky because there's like a retro 60s style, and then there's 60s, you know, and it's very difficult to distinguish between the two, you know, because that sort of real 60s stuff was all very sort of groundbreaking, where, you know, everything was so sort of, it was all so new, you know, that burst of color and materials, plastics, and, you know, lightweight metals, and, you know, all the architecture and all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting period.
Also something that we hadn't seen on film, again, in this kind of genre before. You hadn't seen the 60s as textured and realistic and stylized as we could do it in the superhero genre.
Colonel Hendry.
Yes.
Emma Frost, Sebastian Shaw's associate. On Mad Men, I played through the whole Cuban Missile Crisis stuff, and that felt very period. This doesn't feel like a period piece so much as just a different world.
There's a war coming, John.
Yes. But a war with who?
Initially, when we started thinking about this movie, way back when we started thinking about the movie, it was as a slightly smaller, scaled-down version of an X-Men film. It was more like the Twilight version of the X-Men. Then, once we started thinking in the context of the 60s and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it all started to expand visually, aesthetically.
The whole war room scenarios in the movie, you had the Russian war room and the American war room. And we used Australia House in London, which was essentially a very ornate, classical building, again with shiny floors and shiny columns. And he always wanted to have the American War Room had to top it. Matthew's had this image always from the start of the classic Dr. Strangelove, Ken Adams set of basically the table, the light, and the floor. And it's trying to introduce that into this kind of a movie.
And action.
I was very nervous about the mansion. We've used several mansions. The first movie was shot in Toronto. So our exterior was a mansion in upstate New York, which is where Xavier's school is supposed to be. Once we moved coast, and now we're shooting in Vancouver, we went on to Victoria Island and found the Royal Academy and used that for our exterior and interiors, a lot of interiors, on X2 and 3 in Last Stand. And in X-Men 1, we added the games, and that was shot in LA at Greystoke Mansion. So, you know, we do this all the time. We take a little bit of this location, a little bit of that location, put it together with another exterior, and you think it's all one. When it came to doing it this time, we looked at a lot of mansions.
And we did struggle to find a house that would tie into the whole look of the original mansions. We ended up finding Ingleford House and basically completely paneling it. We added all the paneling to the house, all up the stairs, everywhere, to tie it all in so that you felt like you were in the original house.
We had some of the sets, some of the interiors from the X-Men movies flown over, so we did have some of those, and the rest we just matched.
When you shoot in stately homes here in the UK, it's very difficult because a lot of them, they've got silk carpets down, they've got, you know, very valuable things in, so you can't traipse a film crew over the carpet. So we ended up putting our own floors in, because we wanted, where we were doing the gym, that was actually a living room, and it had a silk carpet down, but we wanted to put a hardwood floor in there. So it's not a case of just pulling the carpet up, we have to put our own floor down to get a lovely shiny floor for all the gym equipment. But then you've got a problem because then all the doors don't open. So we then had to take all the doors off, make our own doors. The range of different environments that we were having to create, you know, going from things like the Hellfire, the X-Jet, the Sub, you know, and then going to, you know, Oxford Apartments. And there was a whole range of stuff to do. It's a dream kind of film to do.